Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Tech Thursday. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk, and today's topic I'm going to be talking about how to bring in SVG files or scalable vector graphics files into Fusion 360. And it's actually quite handy to be able to do stuff like this because you can create some pretty neat things. So for example, in fact I might hold a piece of paper behind this. These are little coffee like latte covers. I'll show you what they do here in just a minute. But I just downloaded stuff off the web. So for example, here's our trailer. I actually just traced our trailer. And what these are for is to make little latte screens. So basically, you create the coffee, you put the creamer in there, you froth it, and then you put the little 3D printed thing on there and sprinkle some hot cocoa or something like sugar or something like that, and you get these cool little images on top of your latte or whatever. And of course I'm not sharing my screen, so give me just a second here. Sorry about that. I'm not really good with sharing web pages. I apologize. So here's the end result that you get. So you take that 3D printed object, you lay it on top of your mug, and then you can sprinkle like sugar or cinnamon or cocoa. So that way you can kind of see the results that you get using these little prints. And like I mentioned before, I downloaded these clip arts basically from the web. I'm also going to show how you can create something kind of like this. This is a sign that I made with my CNC machine that carved away this black area, which of course I then filled in with paint. So I'm going to talk about how we go about doing that. Okay, so the first thing is you can bring in an SVG file. So if I go out to the web, I'm going to just do a quick search. In this case, I did a search for coffee and then SVG. And you can see it comes up with a bunch of different ones, and I found one that I liked. It looks kind of like this. And so I can save this as an SVG file. So I'm going to save the image as, and you'll see right here it says scalable vector graphics file. Okay, so I'm just going to call it, I'll just leave it alone, I'll call it coffee. And then we'll jump over into Fusion. So what I typically try and do is with scalable vector graphics, there's not really a unit like inches or 1-to-1 or centimeters, and that's kind of why it's called scalable vector graphics. And doing a little bit of research, it sounds like back in the day when they used CRT screens, a scalable vector graphic is typically about 92 pixels. So you're going to see when we bring in these SVG files, they're going to come in, the right size, the wrong size, etc. So one of the tips that I do is I actually try and create the object I'm going to make first and then bring in my SVG. So in this case, I want to create that, that coffee screen. So I'm just going to start a new sketch on my top plane. And I know that the diameter that I want this to be is 3.7 inches. In this case, okay, that's the diameter of the mugs that my wife uses for her coffee. So I've just created this circle that's 3.7 inches in diameter. Now under the Insert menu, you'll see that we have an option called Insert SVG. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And pretty simple menu. It says select the SVG file. So I'll go ahead and click, and sure enough, in my downloads, there is that SVG file. Now, you'll notice an interesting icon. I'll get to that here in a moment because I'm using a different program to work with SVG files, but you'll see that here in a few moments. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up this SVG, and here's my first tip. You'll notice that nothing really happened, okay? I don't see anything. However, I do see these little arrows. Okay? Well, so here's the thing. Like I mentioned, it can come in very large or very small. And even if I hit fit to the screen, I don't see anything. So what I typically do is scroll way out. And guess what? We're starting to see this coming in. Okay, and we can see it's huge. It's over 200 inches in width. Okay, so that's the first thing. And I'm pointing this out because I see this a lot on the forums where people are like, I inserted an SVG, but it doesn't come in. Well, zoom out quite a bit and you might see it way off in space. Okay, and again, it depends on how this file was created. Was it created in Illustrator? Was it created in Photoshop or some other product? Was it created near the 0 point, or was it, you know, way off to the side? So zoom out until you see your SVG, and then obviously I want to scale this down. And I have a couple different methods to do that. I can grab this little icon you see right here and just click and drag, and you'll see how that scales it up or down. Okay. Or I can type in a number. So what I typically do is I kind of drag it fairly small, and then let's just zoom back up on this area here. And so you can kind of see I can get it sort of the right size. And then I'm going to drag this little plane icon. You can kind of see this little square until I get it sort of where I want it to be. Now, obviously it's still a little bit too large. Okay. You also have the ability to type in the scale right here. So, for example, I could say 0.5, and we'll see that it made it a little bit smaller. Okay. Now, not quite small enough. Now, here's something interesting. You'll notice it still says 0.5. If I type in like 0.3, it's going to scale it from this size right here. So if I say 0.3, you'll see it got fairly small. Okay, so if I go back to 0.5, you can kind of see how we can kind of tweak with this. So I might just, you know, do a couple different numbers in here, but in all honesty, I typically just use this little scale icon right here. That's what I typically do until I get it about the size that I want that to be. And I'll say, okay. So now I know that my image is inside my 3D printed diameter here. Now what's cool about this is you'll notice that these are actual profiles. I can come in and extrude these. Okay, we didn't have to trace over them or, you know, use the spline tool and click on them or whatever. And that's the cool thing with SVG files. They're vector graphics, and that's what our sketch requires. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish my sketch, and I want to keep these areas open. I want the cocoa powder or the chocolate or whatever to go through these areas. So I'm going to extrude this section here, but I kind of see an issue. Okay, you'll notice that this is a separate profile right here, and it's kind of floating in space. So if I were to 3D print this, it's not connected to anything. So as you start creating stuff like this, you want to make sure, can it be manufactured, right? And in my case, it's going to be 3D printed. So what I want to do is basically maybe just fill this area in right here. So let's go ahead and go back to our sketch. And I want to connect this piece with this piece over here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm basically going to fill in this area. So because these are lines, I can just click on them and hit the delete key on my keyboard. So I'm just holding down delete, and I've deleted those away. Now I need to reconnect these. And you could try using, for example, coincident constraints and stuff like that, but typically that won't work because these are like splines that might, you know, if they were to continue on, might not join up with that particular point there. So I usually just fill in the blanks. And depending on how wide it is, you might want to use a spline. Or since this one's fairly small, I'm just going to create a line that goes between these 2 points. So I'm just going to use the line tool, and we can see that we basically filled that area in. And it looks nice, you know, you don't see that straight line or anything like that because it's so small. But now I have the area that I want to be able to extrude. So let's right click, say extrude. And I'm going to go in the negative direction. Let's just go 0.1 inches in this case. And now we have, if I were to 3D print this right now, I'm going to do some more stuff with it, but you can see that the chocolate powder would be able to go through these open areas. And I did not have to draw this myself using the spline tools and maybe tracing over an image or anything like that. Now, in these examples here, I actually have, I don't know if you can see it very well, I have a small little kind of lip in there that helps catch all of the extra powder or whatever. I have a handle on some of them. Some of them I tried with, you know, 2 handles and maybe putting a little hanger in there. This one I tried, you know, just a simple little finger handle, which I'm going to do in this case. So let's go ahead and add this, this lip that you see in there. And then we'll add in that handle also. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just create a new sketch on this top face. It projects the edge for me automatically, and I'm going to use the offset command. So under my modify, offset, or the O is the shortcut key. So I'm just going to say offset and drag toward the inside, and I want to offset, again, I'll just keep it simple. I'll say 0.1 inches in this case. I'll finish my sketch, and let's go ahead and extrude that up 0.1 inches. Actually, let's go maybe 0.125 in this case. Let's just give it a little bit more of a height. So we're going up 0.125, it's joining. So we still have just one body in this case. And then the last thing I want to do is to create that little handle. So maybe I'll just start on this top face and create a sketch. I want to keep it centered, so I'm going to use my rectangle command. And then in my sketch palette, you can see it shows the different kind of rectangles that we have. So we have 2-point, 3-point, and center. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on the center command there. And that's cool because I don't have to go to create rectangle and then fly down here to center rectangle. I can be just out here in space somewhere. I can hit the R key for rectangle, and there's my option. So I really like that. And that works the same with like circles. You'll notice I'm in my circle command now, and we can see those options there. Okay. So let's go ahead and do our center rectangle. Now I just have to get near this edge. You can kind of see how it's going to snap to it. And I'll just start to draw my rectangle. Now my width, I want to be precise. And right now it says 0.532. So I'm going to just say 0.5. And my length here, I want it to be maybe at least 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to say twice that. So 0.75 times 2. Now I could have typed in 1.5, but I love the fact that we can do mathematical equations in here, so I like showing that off. So you can see 0.75 times 2. Then we'll finish our sketch. And you'll notice I didn't trim this rectangle away or anything like that. I typically don't, because Fusion does it for me automatically. In fact, you'll see right here, I click on that profile and it trimmed. Basically, it's only letting me select what I want to select. So I'm going to come in here and say extrude. I'm going to extrude to that face right there. So I didn't have to type in a distance or anything like that. All I had to do was click on that face and you'll see it extrudes the correct distance. And I'll say okay. Now the last thing I want to do is round over these corners. I'm going to show you another little tip here that I think is kind of useful. I want to fillet this edge, so I'm going to select it and then right mouse click and say fillet. Now let's pretend I forgot what the width of this rectangle is. I didn't write it down on a post-it note or whatever. Maybe it's some weird number like 0.713 or something like that. Well, I want to make this go half the length of whatever this edge is. So I can come in here and say measure. So I'm just clicking the little down arrow. I'm going to say measure, and then I can click on this edge. And it measured that edge and it put it into my little radius field there. So it says it's 0.5. Well, now I can come in and say, well, let's divide that by 2. So I can select my other edge and you'll see how that rounds over. So again, this was a pretty simple example. We knew that this was half an inch, but if it's some weird number like 0.713, you could measure that edge and then divide it in half to get the correct radius for that. So I think that's a neat tip. Okay, so there we go. In just a matter of moments, I was able to create my little latte screen or whatever you want to call them. I'm not even sure what they're called. And I can come in and print that. So I could come in here and say make, click on this guy and send it to my 3D printer. So pretty cool. Okay. Now, what if you can't find an SVG file? So in this first example, we went out to Google Images and we did a search for an SVG file. But let's say the image that we find isn't an SVG file. It's a clip art or it's a picture or something like that. So what I'm going to show you now is a separate tool called Inkscape. So I'm going to jump back over here. And this is the name of the tool. It's free. You can download it. We don't make any money from them. We're not related to them in any way. I just find this a very, very useful tool. So if you want to write this down or whatever, this is the tool I'm going to be using. So this allows you, it's almost kind of like having Adobe Illustrator for free is kind of what it is. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to create something with like an eagle. And so I just did a search out in Google for eagle stencil. And I typed that in because it kind of gives you these profiles and stuff like that. Now, these are not SVGs. These are images like PNG or GIF or BMP, all those different formats. Okay, so I really like this guy right here. So let's go ahead and click on him and say save image. So I'll put it in my downloads and let's just call it eagle. Now you'll notice that this is actually a JPEG image. I'll hit save and it's going to save that onto my hard drive. Okay. So we'll jump back into Inkscape. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up Inkscape. So let me just type it in. There it is. I am not going to teach you every single command in Inkscape. Like I said, it's a pretty powerful program. It's kind of like Adobe Illustrator. But what this allows you to do is I can come in and say, let's open our eagle. So let me see if I can find it. There it is. Eagle. And I'm just going to leave everything alone. So I'm just going to say OK. And of course it jumped to my other screen. So let me bring this back. And here you can see that it brought that image into Inkscape. It's a JPEG. Now what I am going to show you is how you get this into an SVG file. So you need to select your image. So you kind of see when it's not selected, you don't see anything around it. So I'm going to click on it and I see all these little arrows and I can scale it and change it and all that kind of stuff. So let's just maybe do something like this. And then under Path, Trace Bitmap. Okay. I'm going to move this over. So Trace Bitmap brings up this window here, and I'm going to turn on this live preview. And what this is showing is the result. So what this allows you to do is it's going to basically trace around the black areas and turn it into a scalable vector graphic. And you'll see we have lots of options. So we have brightness cutoff, we have edge detection, so you can kind of see how it's going to trace around the edges. You can go by colors, so let's say it wasn't black and white, maybe it was grayscale. You could have it only show, 4 of the colors or 3 of the colors or whatever. But in this case, I'm going to do brightness cutoff. And I recommend messing around with the threshold. Now, it's going to be really hard to see, but watch what happens as I increase this. You're going to see more black show up until it gets almost pure black. So watch right where my kind of cursor is right here. You're going to see that start to appear more black. And so it just basically allows you to thicken the lines, and now you can kind of see it's starting to pick up a whole bunch of extra garbage, extra pixels and stuff like that, until we get to 100% black. So this basically allows you to scroll through until you get kind of the image the way you want. And maybe it gets rid of some of the noise and stuff like that, but I'm going to leave it right about there. And then say, OK. Now, here's what's weird. It doesn't look like it did anything because this menu is still here. But as soon as you say OK, go ahead and click and drag to the left. And you'll notice that we now have 2 images here. And then you actually close out of it. And the only reason they do this is because you could change your setting and hit OK, and it would redo it with the new settings. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and let's just zoom up over here, and you'll see what happened. Okay. So here was the original image. You can kind of see how it's blocky. We can kind of see some of that garbage in the background. But notice this one is nice, crisp, black edges. So it traced around this and made a really nice representation. Okay. So that was Path Trace Bitmap. So then what I typically do is I get rid of the graphic, the JPEG or the BMP. Let's move this nice looking one back in there. And then this is the next important step. When you say save as, by default it says Inkscape SVG. You're going to want to change that to plain SVG. If you leave it Inkscape SVG, it does not come into Fusion for whatever reason. However, plain does work. So you'll definitely want to make sure to use plain SVG. And we'll call this Eagle. Let's just call it Eagle in my downloads. We'll jump back into Fusion. Let's create a new design here. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to set my units to inches in this case, and create my circle at 3.7. And let's insert our SVG file. So I'll select it. There's the eagle. And now this time it actually appeared, and it's actually looks like it's pretty darn close to the right size. I lucked out on this one. Maybe I'll scale it just a little bit larger or whatever, but that is how you can trace any image that you want and bring it as an SVG file into Fusion. So there you go. Pretty cool, I think. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show is doing something a little bit more complicated, kind of like this sign that I showed earlier. So I'm going to go out and do a search for, maybe some kind of a border or whatever. We'll put some text on here, and then I'm going to show you a neat trick in the manufacturer workspace. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to jump over here, and just to save some time, I've already done some searches for, I just did a search for leaf border. Okay, and I found a couple different ones. This one's kind of cool. Maybe something like this, you know. And again, it depends on what you're trying to come up with. But you can search for pretty much anything. And I kind of like this one. I thought it was pretty cool. So let's go ahead and save this image. And this one's a GIF. So I'm going to call this leaf border. Okay. We'll jump back into Inkscape. And let's bring that guy in. So I'm just going to open. And let's just do a search for the leaf. So I'm just going to, should be in alphabetical order. There it is. And I'll just say okay. And again, for whatever reason, it jumps to my other screen. Don't know why. But there it is. Okay. So I'm going to do pretty much the exact same method. So let's, I'm going to scroll out here so you can kind of see what's going on. Move it to the side. So I'm going to select it, path, trace bitmap, and it gives me the preview of what that's going to look like. And again, I can come in and tweak with, you know, how thick I want these, or maybe I want them to be a little bit thin. But notice there's some really kind of thin lines here, so I might want to make sure that those definitely show up. So I'm going to go up into the kind of the higher number here. Let's just say something like 0.6 is good. And I'll say okay. Now again, doesn't look like it did anything, but if we move this away and we zoom up here, you can see, you know, here's the pixelated edge. And here, these are nice and sharp and crisp. It's literally that fast. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the old image that I don't want. And let's just go ahead and save this out. So I'm going to say save as, making sure I change it to plain SVG. And I'll just call it leaf border. Okay. Let's jump into Fusion. I created a new one. Again, I'm gonna do this one in inches. And let's go ahead and create kind of our basic shape here. So I'm gonna create a rectangle. Maybe I want this to be about 24 inches wide, maybe by maybe like, I don't know, 10 inches tall or something. So I just kind of get the basic shape of my sign that I want to do here. Then I can insert my SVG. And we called it leaf border. And luckily, again, this one came in pretty good. So I'm just going to drag that and let's just make it slightly bigger. So kind of hard to see the little icon, but it's right there. And I can drag that to be whatever size I want that to be. Let's just put it maybe something like this. And I'll say, okay. Now here's something kind of cool. Now this is a fairly complex SVG, so you'll notice it's going to take a little bit longer to do certain things. But all of these are individual areas, which I think is just amazing. Think about how long it would take for you to do this using the line command or the spline command or whatever. Now, oops, I want to get rid of some of this stuff. So for example, there's a little tiny hole right there. I can just select it and hit the delete key on my keyboard and it'll remove that little feature. I could do the same thing over here. If I want to get rid of all of this area, I can just draw a selection box around it and you can kind of see all the endpoints, etc. I'm just going to hit delete. And so I could actually edit my SVG file right here inside of Fusion. So let's go ahead. I just want to get rid of that whole area. And maybe I'll get rid of that little corner right there. And again, I could use a line or I could use a spline. It really doesn't matter in this case. I'll just go ahead and do a line. Because it's so small, you probably won't even see it, right? Or I could do the spline. It's really up to you. But I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Sketch. And I now have what I want this to look like. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new sketch. I'm basically creating sketches almost like layers. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this plane right here. And I'm just going to trace over my rectangle. Because I want my rectangle to be its own separate layer in this case. So we can kind of see, for example, if I turn off that first sketch, in fact, I could even rename it, which I highly recommend you do. So I'm going to call this border sketch. It just allows you to kind of figure out what is what much easier. So I'm just clicking on it twice to select it, and then I could say, wood size or something like that. Okay, let's go ahead and extrude this 3/4 of an inch. Maybe I'm going to make it out of 3/4 oak or something like that. If I turn on my border sketch, you can still see it right there. Now I'm going to leave this alone. We're actually not going to do much with this border sketch. So I might turn it on for now, but let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new sketch. Because like I said, I'm kind of doing this in layers. So I'm using my sketches as layers. So now I'm going to create my text. So let's just go ahead and place my text. Let's do the house number. Oops, the house number first. Pretty small, so let's just make I want my house numbers to be about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches tall. Okay, I can specify what font I want them to be. So let's just do maybe like I don't know, Book Antiqua. I think is kind of a cool looking font. And I'm just going to move that over a little bit, like so. Okay, and then I'll do the exact same thing. I'll go ahead and in this case, I'm making a house for a sign for my house. So let's make that 3 inches tall. Maybe let's make it even taller than that. And I'll use the same font. Let's do that Book Antiqua, I think is what I used. I could do bold if I want to or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And I'll place that where I want it to go. Okay. Now, in my last live stream that I did, I shared the tip where you don't have to explode your text to extrude it. And I thought that was really cool because I always thought you had to extrude your text. In this case right now, I do actually have to explode my text because we're going to create a profile for the CAM workspace, the manufacturer workspace, to trace around. So I'm going to go ahead and explode this text just by right-clicking and saying explode. And I'm going to do the same thing with this, the name. Oops. Let me make sure. Oh, I did do it. Sorry, it just took longer. Okay, so now you can see these are individual profiles. Okay, and this is what I want in this case. Now, believe it or not, I'm actually done. I'm ready to manufacture. I'm not going to extrude anything or whatever. Now, I could obviously like fillet edges and maybe put a arc on it or whatever, but what we're going to do now is switch into the manufacturer workspace. I'll go ahead and create a setup, and I'm going to go through at a fairly good pace. I'm not teaching you how to do CAM right now. We're going to delve deeper into all of the options in upcoming live streams. Like I mentioned, I have one of my buddies is going to start doing some CAM specific live streams, so keep an eye out for Angelo doing those. So what I'm going to do here is create my setup. And the first thing I typically do is go over to my stock. And in this case, it's actually adding stock all the way around. So it's kind of hard to see, but if we look at it from the top view, you can actually see it's adding some extra material around this. So that's fine, but I don't want to leave any extra material on the top. Maybe I've already sanded this. I'm not going to face it or anything like that because it's wood, for example. So I'm going to get rid of my stock top. I'm going to make that 0, and now you can kind of see how we're basically saying the very top of the stock is literally the top of the piece of wood. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then we're going to use the engrave option. Under 2D, I'm going to come into engrave. Going from left to right, it asks for the tool. Then it allows you to do like profiles, heights, clearance heights, passes, and then linking. So I'm going to start with the tool, and let's just go ahead and select a chamfer tool. So I'm going to come in here to I'm just going to go into my tutorial section here. Let's just use maybe this 45-degree chamfer mill. It's 1/2 inch in diameter. And I'll say OK. Then I'm going to come over to my geometry, and it's asking for the contour selection. So I can come in and select these contours. Now I noticed right before the live stream started, somebody asked a question about, can you select all of these profiles, using like a selection window? And unfortunately at this time you can't. So you'll see I'm trying to draw a selection window, and it's not letting me. I have to physically tell it which profiles I want. Now, I need to be careful here. I also need to select the inside of this A, like so. I'll grab the little dot like that and like that. So it says it's found 12 chains. I'll say OK, and it's going to calculate how it's going to use this particular cutter to trace around that. So let's go ahead and simulate what this is going to look like. So I'm just going to right mouse click and say simulate. Now if I hit play, it's going to be, you're not going to really see anything going on, okay? And that's because of this option right here. If I turn on stock, it's now showing the stock, and you can kind of see it's kind of carving that away. But the other thing I like to do is to turn off the model right here. So here it's showing the piece of wood, but if I turn that off, now it's simulating like it's cutting it out of, in this case, plastic vinyl. But you can see that it actually used this profile of my font to create this V-carve toolpath, which I think is pretty incredible. You can kind of see, if I turn off my stock, you can kind of see where it's ramping in, going around, curving up. It's really slick. And this is exactly how I created the font. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but it's dusty, but you can kind of see it's actually grooved down in there. So that's how you do that. And then let's go ahead and, so that looks pretty good to me actually. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you have a lot of options in the engrave, like how many passes, what's your sharp corner angle, is it keeping the tool down, entry positions, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to let Angelo show that in upcoming live streams. So we did the easy stuff first. We did the text. Now let's go ahead and do some of the flower border here. Now I already specified my tool that I wanted, my feeds and speeds, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to right mouse click and say duplicate. And it's going to take that guy and duplicate it, and it actually is using all of the same information. Notice the tool is already being used. In fact, if I go over to the geometry, it's even used. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that selection. So that's a neat way, if you've already spent the time setting everything up in one tool and you're basically using it again for something else, just duplicate it. And that way you don't have to type everything in or pick other tools for that. Okay, so I'm gonna, because we have to select each of these individually, I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but I'm gonna pick, the major border here. And I can even leave out parts of my profile, like this little tiny area here I might not want. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do something like this, just to kind of show you the power behind this. So I'm just gonna do maybe this flower in this upper corner here. Let's call that good. And I'll say okay. And it's going to figure out, it's going to take it's about 50% done here. And so there you can see it figured out how to V-carve. So let's do the exact same thing again. Let's turn off our model and let's preview or simulate this. So I'm going to hit play. And you can kind of see it walking around and carving all that stuff away. And I can speed this up. I'm going to crank this up. So you're going to see in areas I didn't select all the profiles, it's going to cut a little bit deeper. But in the areas that I did select, you can see how it's actually carving. Let's turn off the toolpath. You can see how it's going to carve or V-carve using that profile. Okay? Let's go ahead and jump all the way to the end. So like I said, in some areas where I didn't select all of the internal profiles, it's carving pretty deep. But I don't want to waste you guys' time selecting all of those. Okay. Let's turn our model back on. Now you're probably saying, well, what about putting the border over on the other side? Now here's another tip for you. I could have done that in my sketch. But the more complicated your sketch gets, the slower it's going to get. So here's a cool trick. I'm going to switch back to my design workspace. And let's create a mid-plane construction plane. So I'm going to say mid-plane. Let's go from here over to here. Okay. And we can kind of see, okay, maybe I need to lengthen my part just a little bit. So let's go ahead and throw a dimension on here. Oh, do I already have it? Oh, it's because I caught to the other thing. That's right. Shoot, I shouldn't have done that. Let's go ahead and, it's not going to let me. Bummer. Okay. And I don't want to go back, so I'm going to just go ahead. Let's just disregard that because I don't want to waste your time. But I should have done my mid-plane first. And then what we're going to do is go into Manufacture. Now it's complaining at me because I just tried to make a change. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the toolpath. And you'll see that those little exclamation points go away and everything's good. But here's what's really cool. I'm going to select this toolpath here. And under Setup, I'm going to say New Pattern. And you'll see it allows us to pattern. We can do a linear pattern, circular pattern, or a mirror, or a duplication. And this is extremely useful. I'm going to go ahead and do a mirror pattern. What's my mirror plane? We'll go ahead and select that there. I'll say OK. And it is going to, hopefully it did it. Well, why is it not showing up? Of course, this worked perfectly in practice, and now it's not doing it. Anyway, oh, I know why. I'm not showing my toolpath. So let's do this. There's that toolpath. Okay, I did something wrong here. Not sure what. So let me try that again. I apologize. Okay, there's my engrave. I'll say pattern, mirror pattern, mirror plane. There we go. I must have clicked something wrong, so I apologize. There you can kind of see it's going to mirror across. And if I turn off the model, we can see that it took the tool path that we calculated and mirrored across. Okay? So that is a huge time saver. In fact, if we go ahead and simulate this now, I'll go ahead and speed this way up. Let's jump all the way to the end. It's going to figure out all of the toolpaths, and it's going to do it on the other side. In fact, right now you can see it's coloring it by operation. So a great way of simplifying your design is if it's a kind of a mirror image or if it's a pattern or whatever, do as simple as possible, and in CAM you can actually use the pattern command there. Okay, so I apologize for that little mess up there. I must have misclicked, but hopefully you saw the benefit of bringing in anything you want, like an image, and converting that to an SVG, or Scalable Vector Graphics file. You can then bring those SVGs into Fusion and use those for extrusions, revolves, whatever you might think of, and in this case even like wood carving, to simplify the whole design. So again, I want to thank you. Hopefully you learned some new tips and tricks with this. Thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever. Make sure you leave comments. I know my buddy Aaron's been answering the questions in the chat window for me, so thank you, Aaron, for doing that. If you have any other ideas on future live streams, please feel free to post them out there. And I've noticed a couple people have been asking for my email address, so I'll go ahead and throw my email address into the description of this live stream here in a few moments. Please feel free to shoot me an email if you have an idea or you want to show me something. I love getting the emails from the people saying, hey, I made that flagpole mount and here I 3D printed it and stuff like that. So definitely shoot me emails if you have any questions or comments. So with that, I want to wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.